The milk carton lay crushed against the curb, just like the German shepherd's spirit beside it. Time collapsed as Jessica's hand froze mid-reach, the world silencing around her except for the dog's labored breathing. Military dogs were supposed to die heroes, not abandoned on Texas sidewalks. Yet here Shadow lay, medals exchanged for matted fur and open wounds. The dog's identification tags clinked against the pavement, the same metallic whisper that had announced casualties in Afghanistan. 3 generations of Hayes men had served. 3 generations had brought home broken things. July heat pounded the asphalt like artillery fire had once pummeled Kandahar. Same sun, different battlefield, identical consequence. Another soldier left behind. 72 hours, the vet would later say. Treat him or euthanize. The choice hung suspended in the air between mercy and miracle. Why did the noblest creatures always suffer for human failings? The dog's eyes flickered open, brown pools of undeserved loyalty. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Jessica Whitman had seen more than her fair share of abandonment cases during her 15 years at Texas Child Protective Services. She thought herself immune to the shock of human cruelty. Yet something about the German shepherd's broken body made her 38-year-old heart crack open in a way no human case had in years. The dog lay on the examination table at Heartland Animal Hospital while Dr. Kevin Reynolds, a silver-haired veterinarian with hands gentle despite their size, carefully assessed the damage. His expression grew grimmer with each new discovery. "Military dog," he confirmed, scanning the chip embedded beneath the matted fur. "Shadow, service number K98294, Afghanistan deployment 2018 to 2020. His fingers traced the old scars hidden beneath newer wounds. "Someone's been beating this dog, Jessica. These aren't combat injuries." Jessica crossed her arms, heat rising to her face. "Can you save him?" "Distemper's in late stages. Severe malnutrition. Internal bleeding." Dr. Reynolds sighed. "I've seen miracle recoveries, but I don't want to give false hope." The small Texas town of Millfield had seen its share of returning veterans. The base, 60 miles north, sent them home with medals and memories, but little support for either. Jessica had grown up watching her father, a Vietnam vet, battle demons no one else could see. She recognized the same haunted look in Shadow's eyes. "Do everything you can," she said, stroking Shadow's ear. The dog flinched at first, then relaxed into her touch, as if remembering gentleness was possible. Nurse Emily entered with medication and IV fluids. Her scrubs were decorated with cartoon puppies that seemed almost cruel in this context. "Poor baby," she whispered. "Who did this to you?" That question was answered sooner than expected. As Jessica completed paperwork in the waiting room, the clinic door banged open. A man in his early 30s with close-cropped hair and the rigid posture of military training not quite destroyed by civilian life stood in the doorway. His bloodshot eyes scanned the room before locking onto Jessica. "I heard someone brought in a German shepherd," he said, voice sandpaper rough. "Military dog. He's mine." Jessica stood, instinctively placing herself between this stranger and the treatment room door. "Are you Robert Hayes?" The man's shoulders stiffened. "How do you know my name?" "It's on Shadow's microchip." Jessica studied him. The tremor in his hands, the faint smell of alcohol beneath convenience store mouthwash. "I found your dog nearly dead on Sycamore Street. Care to explain why?" Hayes's facade cracked for just a moment, grief, shame, and anger flashing across his face before the military mask slipped back into place. "That's between me and Shadow." "Not anymore," Jessica replied, feeling the weight of responsibility settle over her like a familiar cloak. "Not anymore." The waiting room of Heartland Animal Hospital fell silent as Jessica and Robert faced each other. The ceiling fan clicked rhythmically overhead, punctuating the tension between them. "I want to see him," Robert demanded, taking a step forward. Jessica held her ground. "Dr. Reynolds is treating him right now. No visitors." "I'm not a visitor. I'm his handler." Robert's jaw tightened. "We served together." "And then you beat him," Jessica said, watching his face for confirmation. The flinch in his left eye told her everything. "Shadow is suffering from distemper, malnutrition, and wounds consistent with systematic abuse. The vet gives him 72 hours at best." Robert's military composure wavered. He reached for the wall to steady himself, and Jessica noticed the faded tattoo on his inner wrist, his unit insignia, she guessed. "I need to sit down," he mumbled. Jessica pointed to a chair, maintaining her distance. Social worker instincts kept her alert. Volatile men were unpredictable, especially those carrying trauma. "I didn't mean for it to get this bad," Robert finally said, staring at his hands. "I just couldn't take care of him anymore." "So you abandoned him to die on the street?" Robert's head snapped up. "I didn't abandon him. He ran 2 weeks ago, during the 4th of July. The fireworks—" He trailed off, looking ashamed. Dr. Reynolds emerged from the treatment room before Jessica could respond. His face registered surprise at the new arrival, quickly followed by professional neutrality. "Mr. Hayes?" he asked, recognition dawning. "I treated your dog about 6 months ago. Vaccinations." Robert nodded stiffly. "Shadow is stabilized for now," Dr. Reynolds said, addressing both of them. "He's severely dehydrated and the distemper has affected his nervous system. That's causing the convulsions. We've started antibiotics for secondary infections and fluids for the dehydration." "Will he make it?" Robert asked, his voice barely audible. "The next 72 hours are critical. If he survives that window, his chances improve significantly." Dr. Reynolds' expression softened slightly. "He's a fighter. Military dogs usually are." Jessica watched Robert's reaction carefully. The man seemed genuinely concerned, but that didn't erase what he'd done. "Can I see him?" Robert asked again. Dr. Reynolds glanced at Jessica, sensing the tension. 5 minutes. He needs rest." Robert followed the doctor with Jessica close behind. She wasn't letting this man near Shadow without supervision. The treatment room was quiet except for the beeping of monitoring equipment. Shadow lay on a padded table, IV lines running into his front leg. His once powerful body looked diminished, ribs clearly visible beneath his dull coat. Robert stopped at the doorway as if struck. A sound escaped him. Not quite a word, not quite a sob. "Shadow," he whispered. The dog's ears twitched slightly at the familiar voice, but his eyes remained closed. His chest rose and fell in shallow breaths, each one a small victory against death. Robert approached slowly, extending his hand toward Shadow's head, then hesitating. "I'm sorry, buddy. I'm so sorry." Jessica watched Shadow's reaction. The dog's body tensed slightly, but he didn't flinch away. Something complex was happening between man and dog. Fear, recognition, history. 5 minutes, Dr. Reynolds reminded them, leaving to check on other patients. Robert stood motionless, seemingly afraid to touch Shadow. "We went through hell together," he said, not looking at Jessica. "Afghanistan, 2 tours. "What happened?" Jessica asked, her voice softer than before. Robert's eyes remained fixed on Shadow. "He saved lives. Mine, 3 times. Detected IEDs before anyone else could. The best nose in the unit." A ghost of pride flickered across his face. "When we came home, they just decommissioned him, handed him over to me like equipment being retired." "That doesn't explain the wounds, Robert." He flinched at her directness. "No, it doesn't." The monitors beeped steadily, filling the silence between them. Jessica had interviewed enough trauma survivors to recognize avoidance. "The nightmares started for both of us," Robert finally continued. PTSD. They gave me pills. Nothing for him. Shadow would wake up howling. Neighbors complained. I couldn't sleep. Started drinking. Jessica knew where this was heading, had seen the pattern too many times. And then you took it out on him. Robert's shoulders sagged. I never meant to hurt him. But the fireworks that night, I was drunk. He was panicking, barking. I just wanted silence. His voice broke. I hit him. Not the first time, but the worst. When I woke up the next morning, he was gone. Shadow's body suddenly tensed, a small whimper escaping as a convulsion rippled through him. Robert instinctively reached out, then pulled back, afraid his touch would cause more harm. Time's up, Jessica said firmly as Nurse Emily entered to check Shadow's vitals. Back in the waiting room, Robert seemed deflated, the military posture replaced by the stooped shoulders of a man carrying invisible weight. I've been looking for him, he said. Every day since he ran. To do what? Jessica challenged. Bring him home for more of the same? Robert looked up, eyes hollow. I got help. VA program, 30 days sober. He pulled out a sobriety chip from his pocket. Too late, maybe. But I'm trying. Jessica had heard similar promises from too many abusers to count. Yet something in his voice, raw honesty perhaps, gave her pause. Shadow needs intensive care, she said. The bill will be substantial. I'll pay it. Whatever it takes. Robert reached for his wallet. I've been saving my disability checks. Jessica considered her options. As Shadow's rescuer, she had some say in his fate, but no legal standing if Robert could prove ownership. I'm coming back tomorrow, she decided, and every day until he's better, if he gets better. Robert nodded, understanding the unspoken condition. She would be watching him. I don't deserve his forgiveness, he admitted. No, Jessica agreed. You don't. But Shadow deserves a chance to survive. That's all I care about right now. As Robert left, Jessica returned to Shadow's side. The dog's breathing had steadied somewhat. She sat in the chair beside him, gently stroking the small patch of fur between his ears that seemed free of injuries. You're not alone anymore, she whispered. I promise. As if in response, Shadow's tail moved slightly. Not a wag, but a twitch of acknowledgement. In that moment, Jessica made a silent vow. Whatever happened with Robert, whatever Shadow's fate, she wouldn't abandon this broken soldier the way the system had. Outside, the Texas sunset painted the sky in shades of crimson and gold. Another day ending, another battle beginning. 72 hours on the countdown clock. Shadow's fight for survival had just begun. The first 24 hours of Shadow's treatment passed with agonizing slowness. Jessica canceled her appointments and called in a favor with her supervisor to take emergency personal leave. She couldn't explain why this particular case had seized her heart so completely, but after years of fighting for children no one wanted to save, perhaps she needed one clear, uncomplicated rescue. Except Shadow's case was anything but uncomplicated. At dawn on the second day, Jessica was dozing in the uncomfortable waiting room chair when Dr. Reynolds gently shook her shoulder. You should go home, get some proper rest, he said, concern etching his weathered face. How is he? Jessica asked, ignoring the suggestion. Dr. Reynolds sighed. Still fighting. The convulsions have decreased slightly, but his fever's rising. We're trying to get it under control. Jessica rubbed her eyes. Can I see him? 5 minutes. Then I want you to go home, shower, eat something. You can't help him if you collapse. Shadow looked smaller somehow, despite the IV fluids gradually rehydrating his body. His breathing was labored, each inhale a deliberate battle. Jessica sat beside him, speaking softly about nothing in particular. The weather, the cardinal building a nest outside the clinic window, anything to fill the silence with something other than the beeping monitors. "You have to fight, Shadow," she whispered, gently touching his paw. "Just a little longer." As if on cue, the clinic door chimed. Through the treatment room window, Jessica saw Robert Hayes enter, carrying a duffel bag. He looked different today, clean-shaven, wearing a pressed button-down shirt instead of yesterday's rumpled t-shirt. The effort was visible, deliberate. Dr. Reynolds intercepted him in the waiting room. Jessica couldn't hear their conversation, but she watched Robert unzip the duffel bag and remove something, a worn green blanket with military insignia. "It's his," Robert explained when they entered the treatment room. "From our deployment. Thought it might, comfort him somehow." Jessica nodded, moving aside to let Robert place the blanket near Shadow's nose. The dog's nostrils flared slightly, taking in the familiar scent. "I brought his medical records too," Robert said, producing a folder. "From the Army and the civilian vet visits after." He handed it to Dr. Reynolds. "Thought it might help." The doctor nodded appreciatively. "It will. Thank you." An awkward silence fell. Jessica, exhausted from her night in the waiting room chair, finally broke it. "I'm going to get coffee. Either of you want some?" Both men declined. As Jessica left, she glanced back to see Robert carefully settling into the chair she'd vacated, his movements measured, as if afraid to disturb the air around Shadow. When Jessica returned 30 minutes later, she paused at the treatment room door. Robert was speaking to Shadow in a low voice, unaware of her presence. "Remember that sandstorm in Kandahar? Couldn't see 3 feet ahead. Everyone panicking, but not you. You just kept your nose to the ground, led us straight back to base." His voice cracked slightly. "Jake said you were magic. Called you Shadow the Supernatural." A pained smile crossed his face. He was always coming up with those stupid nicknames. Jessica's presence must have registered because Robert straightened up, clearing his throat. "Sorry, just talking to him." "It's good for him to hear familiar voices," she said, offering a tentative olive branch. "Who's Jake?" The question landed like a physical blow. Robert's expression shuddered. Who was Jake?" He stood abruptly. "I should go. Got an appointment at the VA." Before Jessica could respond, he was gone, the bell above the clinic door announcing his hasty departure. "Doctor." Reynolds reviewed Shadow's military records throughout the morning, occasionally making notes or conferring with colleagues by phone. By afternoon, he called Jessica into his office. "These records are illuminating," he said, spreading several pages across his desk. "Shadow served with distinction. Multiple commendations for detecting explosives, credited with saving at least 17 lives." He pointed to a notation. "But there's something else. After their last deployment, both Shadow and Sergeant Hayes were treated for trauma. Shadow exhibited symptoms consistent with canine PTSD." "Dogs get PTSD?" Jessica asked. "Absolutely. Especially military working dogs. They experience the same combat stressors as their human counterparts. Loud noises, unpredictable environments, the constant threat of danger." He flipped to another page. "The military vet recommended ongoing treatment, but once Shadow was discharged to Robert's care, it appears that stopped." Jessica processed this information. "So they were both traumatized, both struggling, and likely triggering each other's symptoms," Dr. Reynolds finished. "It's not uncommon. A handler's anxiety can amplify their dog's anxiety and vice versa, creates a feedback loop." "That doesn't excuse abuse," Jessica said firmly. "No, it doesn't," Dr. Reynolds agreed. "But it might explain the perfect storm that led to it." He closed the folder. "Shadow's latest blood work shows some improvement in his infection markers, but his neurological symptoms remain concerning. The next 24 hours will be crucial." As evening approached, Nurse Emily rushed into the waiting room where Jessica was thumbing through an outdated magazine. "He's having a seizure," she said. "A bad one." Jessica followed her to the treatment room where Shadow's body was rigid, limbs jerking uncontrollably. Dr. Reynolds was already administering medication. "Call Mr. Hayes," he instructed Emily. "Tell him to come now if he wants to say goodbye." The words hit Jessica like a physical blow. "I thought he was improving." "The distemper is attacking his central nervous system," Dr. Reynolds explained, his movements calm despite the urgency. "These seizures can cause permanent damage or be fatal." Jessica felt tears burning behind her eyes, but blinked them back. She'd learned long ago that falling apart didn't help anyone. Robert arrived 20 minutes later, breathless and panic-stricken. By then, the seizure had subsided, leaving Shadow unconscious but stable. "Is he—" Robert couldn't finish the question. "He survived this episode," Dr. Reynolds said. "But I need to be honest with both of you. His chances are declining. The next seizure could be his last." Robert sank into the chair beside Shadow's bed, face ashen. "This is my fault." "Blame doesn't help him now," Dr. Reynolds said gently. "What might help is your presence. Familiar scents, voices. They can sometimes reach through even when medications can't." Jessica watched Robert's hand hover uncertainly over Shadow's still form. "I'll leave you with him," she said softly, recognizing the need for privacy and what might be a final goodbye. In the hallway, Dr. Reynolds stopped her. "You should prepare yourself too, Jessica. I know you've become attached." She nodded, unable to speak around the lump in her throat. Outside, the Texas night had turned stormy, thunder rumbling in the distance. Jessica sat in her car, finally allowing the tears to come. She'd seen death before. It was an inescapable part of her work with the state's most vulnerable children. But something about Shadow's quiet dignity in the face of suffering had broken through her professional detachment. The clinic lights remained on long after closing time. Through the window, Jessica could see Robert still sitting beside Shadow, his head bowed. She couldn't bring herself to leave, even as the first heavy raindrops began to fall. Near midnight, Jessica returned inside, soaked from the short dash from her car. The waiting room was dark, but light spilled from the treatment area. She found Robert in the same position, though he'd pulled his chair closer to Shadow's bed. The dog's condition appeared unchanged, still unconscious, but breathing. "You should get some rest," Jessica said, echoing Dr. Reynolds' earlier advice to her. Robert shook his head. "I abandoned him once, not doing it again." His voice was rough with unshed tears. "Even if all I can do is be here at the end." Jessica nodded, understanding. She pulled another chair beside his, and they settled into a silent vigil, two strangers united by their concern for the broken warrior between them. As the storm intensified outside, Robert finally spoke. "Jake was my best friend. We joined up together, served in the same unit. Shadow was assigned to us after our first tour." He stared at his hands. "Last mission, we were clearing a village. Shadow alerted on an IED, saved most of the unit, but Jake—" his voice faltered. "Jake was too close when it went off." Jessica remained silent, recognizing the painful gift of this confidence. "I blamed Shadow," Robert continued. "Kept thinking if he'd found it sooner, Jake would still be alive. I know it's not rational. He did his job perfectly. The failure was human, not canine. But grief isn't rational." Thunder crashed outside, and Shadow's body twitched in response. "When we got home, everything reminded me of Jake. Shadow most of all. Every time I looked at him, I saw that day. Started drinking to make it stop." Robert's confession came in halting fragments. "The fireworks that night sounded like mortars. I was drunk, lost in a flashback. Shadow was barking, panicking too. I just wanted quiet, wanted the war to stop replaying in my head. Jessica thought of her father, of the nights he'd woken screaming, of the bottles hidden throughout the house. PTSD is a terrible burden, she said softly, for both of you. Robert looked at her, surprise flickering across his face at the lack of judgment. The program I'm in, it's helping. Too late, maybe, but he reached out, gently touching Shadow's paw. I just want a chance to make it right. Shadow's eyelids fluttered, though he didn't wake. Both humans froze, watching for any further response. Talk to him, Jessica encouraged. He knows your voice. Robert leaned closer. Hey, Shadow, he said, voice breaking. I'm here, buddy. I'm not going anywhere this time. As the night deepened, they took turns talking to Shadow, sharing stories. Robert described their training days, missions where Shadow's keen nose had saved lives. Jessica told about the children she'd helped, cases where a therapy dog had broken through trauma barriers words couldn't penetrate. He'd be good at that, Robert said. He always knew who needed comfort in our unit. Would just go sit beside them. No training required. If he pulls through, Jessica ventured. Have you thought about his future? Robert was quiet for a long moment. I want him back, but I need to earn that right. He met her eyes directly. If he survives, I'll accept whatever arrangement is best for him, even if that's not with me. The honesty of this admission shifted something between them. Not friendship, not yet, but the beginning of mutual respect. As dawn approached, Shadow's breathing changed subtly. Dr. Reynolds, who had been checking in throughout the night, noticed immediately. His fever's breaking, he announced after examining the dog. It's a good sign, but not definitive. The neurological damage from the seizure remains my primary concern. What happens now? Jessica asked. We wait. Watch for signs of consciousness, responsiveness. Dr. Reynolds checked Shadow's reflexes. The fact that he's made it through the night is already beating the odds. As morning light filtered through the clinic windows, Jessica persuaded Robert to accompany her to the diner across the street for breakfast. They both needed food, fresh air, and a moment away from the sick-room atmosphere. Thank you, Robert said unexpectedly as they waited for their coffee. For finding him, for not giving up. Jessica nodded, too exhausted for pretense. I'm still angry about what happened. You should be. Robert accepted this without defense. I am too. When they returned to the clinic, they found Nurse Emily excited. He's responding. Come see. Shadow's eyes were open, cloudy with illness, but alert. More remarkably, his tail thumped weakly against the blanket when he saw them. Well, I'll be damned, Dr. Reynolds said, checking Shadow's vitals. Looks like someone's not ready to give up the fight after all. The first plot turn had arrived. Shadow had survived the critical 72-hour window. The road to recovery stretched ahead, uncertain but no longer impossible. As Jessica and Robert exchanged cautious smiles over Shadow's bed, something shifted in the atmosphere. A fragile hope taking root where despair had reigned. The days following Shadow's breakthrough melded together in a cautious rhythm of small victories and setbacks. Jessica arranged to work remotely, setting up her laptop in the corner of Heartland Animal Hospital's break room. Robert split his time between Shadow's bedside and his VA appointments, never missing either. Dr. Reynolds had warned them that recovery would be nonlinear. The distemper virus has caused neurological damage, he explained during their impromptu case conference 1 week after Shadow's admission. The tremors may persist indefinitely, and his immune system remains compromised. Yet with each passing day, Shadow demonstrated the resilience that had made him an exceptional military dog. His appetite returned gradually, first accepting small amounts of liquid nutrition from a syringe, then progressing to soft food. The moment he voluntarily took kibble from Robert's hand marked a celebration worthy of champagne, though they settled for coffee in paper cups. He recognized the command, Robert said one morning, his voice filled with wonder. Jessica had arrived to find him sitting cross-legged on the floor beside Shadow's bed, the dog's eyes fixed intently on his former handler. "What command?" she asked, setting down her ever-present travel mug. "Stand down. It means relax. Threat's over." Robert demonstrated the subtle hand gesture accompanying the verbal command. Military working dogs are trained to remain on alert until explicitly told the danger has passed. I think he's been on alert since Afghanistan." The insight struck Jessica with unexpected force. How many veterans, human and canine, remained perpetually vigilant, bodies home but minds still in combat zones? "Show me more commands," she suggested, settling beside them on the clinic floor. Over the next hour, Robert demonstrated Shadow's training vocabulary. Though the dog's responses were sluggish, his comprehension remained intact. Each successful response strengthened the tenuous thread reconnecting Shadow to his past life, not the trauma, but the purpose, the partnership. "He was magnificent in the field," Robert said, a rare smile softening his features. "Watch this. Shadow. Find." The German shepherd's ears perked forward, his posture changing despite physical weakness. Robert placed a small treat beneath one of 3 paper cups, shuffling them while Shadow watched. Despite his impaired mobility, Shadow's nose unerringly identified the correct cup. "That's how he found explosives," Robert explained. "Best nose in the regiment." As Shadow's physical condition stabilized, Dr. Reynolds allowed longer periods outside his kennel. First in a wheelchair fashioned from a modified garden cart, then supported by a harness that helped compensate for his weakened hindquarters. "The fresh air's as healing as any medicine, Doctor," Reynolds observed, watching Shadow bask in the sunshine of the clinic's small fenced yard. "And he needs sensory stimulation to rebuild neural pathways." During these outdoor sessions, Jessica began noticing the subtle dynamics between Shadow and Robert. Despite everything, the dog oriented himself toward his former handler, tracking Robert's movements even when appearing to rest. "It's a working dog thing," Robert explained when she mentioned it. "They're always half-focused on their handler, even off-duty." "Even after what happened?" Jessica couldn't help asking. Robert's expression tightened momentarily. "Dogs live in the present more than we do. They're capable of forgiveness in ways humans struggle with." He paused, watching Shadow investigate a butterfly that had landed nearby. "Though some things might be beyond forgiveness." These philosophical exchanges became commonplace during their shared vigils. Jessica learned about Robert's childhood in rural Pennsylvania, his friendship with Jake since elementary school, their joint decision to enlist after high school when college scholarships fell through. In turn, she shared stories about her work in child protective services, the frustrations and occasional triumphs. Robert proved an attentive listener, asking thoughtful questions about cases that most people would find too disturbing to discuss. "You see the worst of humanity daily," he observed. "How do you not lose faith entirely?" Jessica considered this while stroking Shadow's ear. The dog had progressed to lying between them during these conversations, occasionally shifting position to request attention from one or the other. "I focus on the moments of grace," she finally answered. "The foster parent who refuses to give up on the problem child. The teacher who notices the bruises no one else sees. The kid who somehow maintains their capacity for joy despite everything." She smiled faintly. "It's like finding diamonds in a landfill. Rare, but worth the search." 2 weeks into Shadow's recovery, they established a routine. Jessica arrived early mornings before work, bringing breakfast for the 3 of them. Egg sandwiches for the humans, specially prepared soft food for Shadow. Robert typically appeared mid-afternoon after his VA sessions, often staying until closing. Dr. Reynolds had initially bent the rules allowing their extended visits, but as Shadow's improvement correlated visibly with their presence, he eventually stopped pretending it was an exception. "The attachment is mutual," Nurse Emily observed one evening, watching Shadow's alert response when Jessica entered after a difficult day at work. "He knows when either of you is upset, too. Notice how he leans against your leg." That's comfort behavior. Jessica had indeed noticed Shadow's increasing sensitivity to their emotional states. When Robert arrived tense after challenging therapy sessions, Shadow would place his head on the man's knee until the tight lines around his eyes softened. When Jessica arrived distracted by difficult cases, Shadow would nudge her hand persistently until she focused on the present moment. "He's rehabilitating us," Jessica joked, though the truth in the observation lingered. The turning point in Shadow's recovery and in the tentative alliance between his human advocates arrived unexpectedly during their third week at Heartland. Jessica arrived to find the clinic in unusual commotion. Dr. Reynolds met her at the door, his typically calm demeanor disrupted. "Shadow had another seizure early this morning," he said without preamble. "Not as severe as before, but concerning." "Where's Robert?" Jessica asked, immediately noticing his absence. "That's the other issue." "Doctor." Reynolds lowered his voice. "He was here when it happened. The seizure triggered something. A flashback, I think. He became disoriented, started shouting about needing to secure the perimeter." The veterinarian ran a hand through his silver hair. "Emily managed to call the VA crisis line. They sent someone to pick him up." Jessica felt her chest tighten. "And Shadow?" "Stable now, but subdued. He's been watching the door all morning." In Shadow's room, the dog lay curled unusually tight, eyes fixed on the entrance. When he saw Jessica, his tail gave a perfunctory thump, but his gaze immediately returned to the door. "He's waiting for Robert," Nurse Emily said softly. Jessica settled beside Shadow, gently stroking his flank. "Robert will be back," she assured him, hoping she spoke truth. By evening, with no word from Robert, Jessica's concern deepened. She called the VA hospital but received only the standard privacy policy response. They could neither confirm nor deny any patient's presence. As Heartland's closing time approached, Dr. Reynolds found Jessica still at Shadow's side. "I've spoken with the overnight staff," he said. "They'll check on him hourly. You should go home, get some rest." Jessica nodded, knowing he was right, yet reluctant to leave. "If Robert calls, you'll be my first call," Dr. Reynolds promised. At home, Jessica's apartment felt eerily quiet after so many days surrounded by the ambient sounds of the clinic. She showered mechanically, made a sandwich she couldn't finish, and scrolled mindlessly through her phone. Around midnight, restlessness drove her to her laptop, where she began researching canine PTSD and dual diagnosis treatment programs for veterans and their service animals. The articles led her down an unexpected path to specialized rehabilitation facilities for military working dogs. Most focused on physical injuries, but newer programs addressed the psychological impact of combat deployment. One center in particular caught her attention: Warrior Bond Rehabilitation in San Antonio, about 3 hours from Millfield. Their program specifically addressed the handler-dog relationship when both suffered from PTSD, offering tandem treatment modalities. Jessica was still reading testimonials when her phone rang. The clinic's number flashed on screen. "It's Emily," said the night nurse. "Robert's here. He seems not good. Dr. Reynolds thought you might want to know." "I'm on my way," Jessica said, already reaching for her keys. She found Robert sitting in the darkened waiting room, still wearing hospital scrubs. His 1,000-yard stare barely registered her arrival. "They kept me under observation," he said, voice flat. "Mandatory 72-hour hold. but I convinced them I wasn't a danger to myself or others. A humorless smile touched his lips. Not currently, anyway. What happened? Jessica asked, settling into the chair beside him rather than across. Shadow's seizure, the sounds he made. It took me back to the explosion. To Jake. Robert's hands trembled slightly. 1 minute I was here, the next I was back there, pulling what was left of my best friend from the debris while Shadow tried to alert on secondary devices. The clinical term was dissociative flashback, Jessica knew. The human mind protecting itself from unbearable reality by detaching completely. "Have you seen him yet?" she asked, nodding toward Shadow's room. Robert shook his head. "I'm afraid to. What if I trigger another seizure? What if I lose it again?" His voice dropped to a whisper. "What if I hurt him?" "You won't," Jessica said with more certainty than she felt. "But I'll be right beside you." Shadow was awake, his head rising immediately when they entered. Despite his weakened condition, he attempted to stand, whining softly when his legs buckled. "Easy, boy," Robert murmured, rushing forward without hesitation, his own distress forgotten in the face of Shadow's need. "I'm here. I'm here." Jessica watched as man and dog reconnected. Shadow's trembling body pressed against Robert's chest, Robert's arms gentle around the shepherd's thin frame. Something fundamental had shifted, though she couldn't yet name it. "I found a program," she said after the initial reunion subsided. "In San Antonio, they specialize in treating veterans and their service dogs simultaneously when both have PTSD. Robert looked up, surprise evident in his reddened eyes. "They have an intensive residential program," Jessica continued. "Medical staff for Shadow's ongoing recovery, therapy for you, and specialized training to rebuild your working relationship." "Sounds expensive," Robert said, the momentary hope in his expression already fading. "There's funding available for veterans with service-connected disabilities," Jessica said, having already noted this in her research. "And I've made some calls to military support organizations about sponsoring Shadow's portion." "You've been busy," Robert observed, something like grudging admiration in his tone. "It's what I do," Jessica shrugged. "Find resources for those who need them." Robert was silent for a long moment, his hand continuing its rhythmic stroking of Shadow's fur. "Why are you doing all this?" he finally asked. "After what I did to him, why help me at all?" The question deserved an honest answer. Jessica considered her words carefully. "At first, it was just about Shadow," she admitted. "Saving him, making sure he was safe from further harm. But watching you two together?" She gestured to their current position, Shadow's head resting trustingly on Robert's leg despite everything. "This bond is worth salvaging for both your sakes." Robert nodded slowly, digesting this. "I don't deserve a second chance." "Maybe not," Jessica agreed. "But Shadow does. And for whatever reason he's chosen to keep trusting you." They sat in contemplative silence, the only sounds Shadow's breathing and the distant hum of clinic equipment. "There's an application process," Jessica finally said. "Assessments for both of you. I can help with the paperwork." "Thank you," Robert said simply. Then, with the shadow of his old military decisiveness, "Let's do it." The following days became a flurry of activity. Jessica coordinated with Warrior Bond while Robert underwent evaluations at the VA. Dr. Reynolds contributed detailed medical reports documenting Shadow's condition and progress. "They've agreed to review the case on an expedited basis," Jessica announced one afternoon, hanging up her phone triumphantly. "If approved, they could have space available within 2 weeks." "That soon?" Robert looked simultaneously relieved and terrified. "Shadow's military service record helped," Jessica explained. "Plus your voluntary participation in the VA program. They're prioritizing cases where intervention might prevent..." She trailed off, unsure how to delicately reference the suicide statistics for combat veterans. Before we completely self-destruct, Robert finished for her, his attempt at dark humor not quite masking the underlying truth. Shadow, sensing the tension, pressed himself against Robert's leg. The gesture, both seeking and offering comfort, epitomized their complex relationship, mutual damage, mutual healing. As Shadow's discharge from Heartland approached, Jessica found herself increasingly invested in the outcome beyond professional satisfaction. Something about this broken partnership had resonated with her own carefully guarded wounds. Her father's untreated PTSD, her mother's eventual departure, the childhood spent walking on eggshells around a war that had ended decades before she was born. "You've become our guardian angel," Robert told her during one of their now customary evening debriefs in the clinic's break room. "Shadow and I wouldn't have this chance without you." Jessica dismissed the praise with a wave. "Just doing my job." "No," Robert said firmly. "Your job ended with reporting me for animal abuse, which you had every right to do. This," he gestured to the binder of application material she'd assembled, "this is above and beyond." Before she could formulate a response, Dr. Reynolds appeared in the doorway, his expression unusually grave. "We need to talk," he said. "All of us." The somber tone sent a chill through Jessica. She glanced at Shadow, peacefully sleeping in his bed nearby, showing no obvious signs of distress. "Shadow's latest tests show some concerning developments," Dr. Reynolds began once they were seated in his office. "The neurological damage from the distemper is more extensive than we initially thought. The seizures have left scar tissue on his brain." "What does that mean for his recovery?" Robert asked, his posture tensing. Dr. Reynolds sighed. "It means complete recovery is unlikely. The tremors will probably be permanent. His stamina will be reduced. And there's a significant chance of recurring seizures throughout his life." The news settled heavily between them. "Will this affect his acceptance into the program?" Jessica asked, practical concerns immediately surfacing. "I've spoken with their medical director," Dr. Reynolds said. "They're still willing to accept him, but with adjusted expectations. Shadow won't return to anything resembling working capacity." Robert's expression remained carefully neutral, though Jessica noticed his hands clenching beneath the desk. "He'll need lifelong medication," Dr. Reynolds continued. "Special care during episodes. It won't be easy, and it won't be cheap." Jessica waited for Robert's response, prepared for disappointment or worse, rejection. Instead, after a long moment, he asked a single question. "Will he suffer?" Dr. Reynolds considered this thoughtfully. "Not if his condition is properly managed. He can still have good quality of life. It just won't be the life he had before." Robert nodded slowly. "Then nothing's changed. He's still Shadow, still deserves his chance." He looked directly at Jessica, something resolute in his gaze. "We're still doing this if you're willing to keep helping us." The decision marked another turning point in their journey. Shadow's path forward now acknowledged limitations that couldn't be overcome through sheer determination. Yet in accepting these boundaries, a different kind of healing began, one rooted in reality rather than wishful thinking. As Shadow's discharge date from Heartland approached, Jessica found herself increasingly reflective about the unlikely bond that had formed between them all. She'd entered Shadow's life as a rescuer, then became an advocate, and somewhere along the way had become something closer to family. The afternoon before Shadow's scheduled departure for San Antonio, Jessica arrived at the clinic to find Robert and Dr. Reynolds engaged in what appeared to be a serious conversation. They fell silent when she entered, exchanging glances that immediately raised her suspicions. "What's going on?" she asked, setting down the supplies she'd brought for Shadow's journey. "We were just discussing aftercare arrangements," Dr. Reynolds said smoothly. Too smoothly, Jessica looked to Robert, who seemed uncharacteristically evasive. "There's something you're not telling me," she pressed. Robert sighed. "I was hoping to wait until everything was confirmed, but—" He straightened, meeting her gaze directly. "The program at Warrior Bond is 3 months. After that, Shadow and I will need a permanent living situation." "I thought you had your apartment?" Jessica said, confused. "Third floor walk-up, no elevator, with Shadow's mobility issues." He shook his head. "It won't work. And most affordable places have strict pet policies, especially for large breeds with medical conditions." Understanding dawned. "You're worried about finding housing. The VA has a transitional housing program," Robert explained. "But they don't allow dogs, even service animals in some facilities." Jessica absorbed this new complication. After everything, after all the progress, such a practical obstacle seemed both trivial and insurmountable. "What about your family?" she asked, realizing she knew little about Robert's support system outside the VA. "Dad died while I was deployed. Mom's in assisted living in Florida. No siblings." Robert's matter-of-fact tone barely masked the isolation beneath. "I've got some battle buddies who might let me crash temporarily, but not with a special needs dog." Jessica's mind raced through possibilities: social service agencies, veteran housing programs, temporary foster arrangements for Shadow. None seemed adequate to keep this fragile partnership intact during the critical post-treatment period. "I have a house," she heard herself say, before fully processing the implications. 3 bedrooms, fenced yard. I bought it as a foreclosure last year, been slowly renovating it myself." Robert stared at her, clearly not following her train of thought. "The guest room and study are finished," Jessica continued, surprising herself with each word. "The yard needs work, but it's secure. No stairs to the main level." "Jessica," Robert began, understanding dawning. "It would be temporary," she added quickly. "Just until you find a suitable place. A transitional arrangement." Dr. Reynolds watched this exchange with barely concealed interest, wisely remaining silent. "I couldn't impose like that," Robert said, though the relief in his eyes betrayed him. "It's not imposition, it's pragmatism," Jessica countered. "Shadow needs stability during recovery. You need a place that accommodates his needs. I have space sitting empty." She shrugged as if the decision were entirely practical, devoid of emotional investment. "It makes sense." Robert seemed to struggle for words. "You've already done so much." "Consider it extended foster care," Jessica said firmly, "for both of you." The arrangement, born of necessity and articulated before fully considered, felt simultaneously impulsive and inevitable. Jessica, who guarded her personal space zealously after growing up in a household where sanctuary could become battlefield without warning, was offering to share her hard-won haven. Yet, watching Shadow that evening, his head resting trustingly on Robert's leg while they reviewed the program materials together, Jessica recognized that some decisions transcend logic. Sometimes healing happens in the spaces between careful plans, in the messy, complicated territory of human and animal connection. Tomorrow they would begin the journey to San Antonio, to a program that promised expert intervention, but no guarantees. Shadow's physical limitations were now acknowledged realities rather than temporary setbacks. Robert's recovery remained fragile, his sobriety a daily choice rather than a secured victory. Nothing was certain except this: a broken dog and a damaged man had somehow found their way back to each other through extraordinary circumstances. And Jessica, against all professional boundaries and personal caution, had become inextricably part of their story. As twilight settled over the clinic, Shadow dozed between them, his breathing deep and even, unburdened by the complexities of the future. In his simple presence, Jessica found unexpected peace, a reminder that sometimes the most profound healing begins with simply bearing witness to another's journey, human or otherwise. The Warrior Bond Rehabilitation Center sprawled across 15 acres of former ranch land outside San Antonio. As Jessica guided her SUV through the security gate, she noted the careful balance between military precision and healing atmosphere. Gardens lined the winding driveway, but the buildings maintained the practical functionality of a working facility. In the back seat, Shadow rested on his specialized orthopedic bed, occasionally lifting his head to gaze out the window. Robert sat beside him, one hand resting protectively on the dog's flank. The 3-hour drive had been mostly silent, each lost in private thoughts about the uncertain path ahead. "Looks like our welcoming committee," Jessica observed as they approached the main building. A small group waited on the steps, a woman in crisp khakis with a tablet, a man in scrubs, and most notably, a yellow Labrador wearing a service vest. "That's Dr. Abernathy," Robert said, recognizing the woman from their video consultation. "Former Army psychiatrist, specialized in combat trauma. The dog is probably Luna. She works with all the incoming patients." Jessica parked in the designated spot, then turned to face her passengers. "Ready?" Robert took a deep breath, military bearing settling over him like armor. "As we'll ever be." The next hour passed in a whirlwind of introductions, paperwork, and assessments. Dr. Abernathy led them through the facility while her assistant helped transport Shadow to the veterinary wing for evaluation. "Our program is unique because we recognize the interdependence between handler and service dog," she explained, showing them training areas, therapy rooms, and communal spaces. "When both are traumatized, traditional approaches often fail. You can't heal one without addressing the other." The facility housed 12 veterans and their dogs at a time, providing intensive treatment over the 3-month residency. The daily schedule included individual therapy, group sessions, specialized training, and medical care. "For Shadow, we'll focus first on physical rehabilitation," Dr. Abernathy continued, "managing his neurological symptoms, building strength, and establishing a medication protocol for long-term stability." "And for me?" Robert asked, his voice steady despite the tension evident in his shoulders. "Trauma processing, coping skills, and relearning how to partner with Shadow given his new limitations." Dr. Abernathy's direct approach seemed to resonate with Robert's military mindset. "This isn't about returning to who you were before deployment. It's about building something new that honors what you've both survived." The tour concluded at Shadow's accommodation, a spacious room with specialized flooring for secure footing adjacent to the handler's quarters. The setup allowed constant proximity while providing medical supervision. "This is where I leave you," Jessica said once Shadow was settled on his bed, reunited with his military blanket, and looking exhausted but secure. Robert's expression tightened. "You're not staying?" "Just for today," Jessica explained gently. "I'll come back for family weekends, but this part of the journey is yours." They both knew this moment had been approaching, yet standing at the threshold made the separation suddenly real. For weeks they'd operated as a unit, Jessica the advocate, Robert the handler, Shadow the focal point of their shared purpose. "Thank you," Robert said, the words inadequate for everything she'd done, "for finding him. For not giving up on either of us." "Call me if you need anything," Jessica replied, "day or night." As she turned to leave, Shadow whined softly from his bed. The sound stopped her, pulling her back to kneel beside him. "You've got this," she whispered, stroking his head. "Both of you do." Shadow licked her hand once, then settled his head on his paws, eyes tracking between her and Robert as if ensuring his pack remained connected even as one prepared to depart. The drive home felt interminable. Jessica's house, when she finally arrived, echoed with unfamiliar emptiness. She'd grown accustomed to spending most waking hours at the clinic, to the rhythm of Shadow's treatment and Robert's visits. Now, surrounded by half-finished renovation projects and unopened mail, she felt strangely adrift. She busied herself preparing the guest room and study for their eventual return, installing a ramp over the back steps for Shadow's access to the yard, researching orthopedic dog beds for the living room, practical tasks to channel the unexpected sense of loss. The first update came 3 days later, a brief video call showing Shadow in hydrotherapy, his legs moving more smoothly in the buoyancy of water than they could on land. Robert's voice narrated with cautious optimism about their initial progress. Though he looked exhausted, the emotional demands of the program evident in the shadows beneath his eyes. "How are the group sessions?" Jessica asked, knowing these often proved most challenging for combat veterans accustomed to handling trauma alone. "Brutal," Robert admitted, "but necessary. There's a Marine here with his Belgian Malinois. They survived an IED that killed the rest of their unit." Hearing his story, he paused. "Makes me realize we're not alone in this." The weekly updates became Jessica's anchors, though she maintained careful professional boundaries in their conversations. She shared news from Dr. Reynolds and Nurse Emily, who asked about Shadow regularly. She described her progress on house projects, preparation for their arrival. What remained unspoken was how thoroughly her life had reorganized around their eventual return. The first family weekend arrived 4 weeks into the program. Jessica made the drive to San Antonio with a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. How much would have changed? Would the fragile trust they'd built withstand the separation? Her concerns evaporated the moment she entered the facility's common room. Shadow, spotting her from across the space, attempted to trot toward her with unmistakable enthusiasm. His gait remained uneven, but the improvement in his mobility was remarkable. Behind him, Robert followed, a smile transforming his typically solemn features. "Look at you," Jessica exclaimed, kneeling to accept Shadow's greeting. The dog pressed against her, tail wagging with more vigor than she'd ever witnessed. "You're doing so well." "The tremors are almost gone," Robert reported proudly. "They've got him on a medication protocol that's working wonders, and the hydrotherapy is rebuilding muscle mass he lost during the illness." Jessica noticed other changes, too. Robert stood straighter, the hypervigilant tension in his shoulders noticeably reduced. He'd gained healthy weight, and the haunted look in his eyes had diminished, though not disappeared entirely. The weekend included family briefings with treatment teams, observational sessions where Jessica watched Robert and Shadow practice their modified working commands, and unstructured time for reconnection. Jessica met other veterans and their service dogs, each pair working through their own version of combat aftermath. "It helps, seeing others going through similar struggles," Robert confided during a quiet moment on the facility's patio. Shadow dozed at their feet, occasionally twitching in his dreams. "Makes me feel less broken." "You're not broken," Jessica said firmly. "Neither of you are. Just rewiring after unimaginable circumstances." Robert studied her thoughtfully. Dr. Abernathy said something similar, called it post-traumatic growth. The idea that trauma can be a catalyst for positive change, not just damage to overcome. "I like that perspective," Jessica said. "It honors the pain without letting it define the future." As the weekend concluded, saying goodbye proved easier than before. The tangible progress provided reassurance, and the clear treatment path offered structure to contain their hopes. "6 more weeks," Robert said as they walked toward the parking lot. "Then we come home." The casual use of home, referring to her house, lingered in Jessica's thoughts during the drive back. She'd offered temporary accommodation out of practical necessity. Yet somewhere along the way, The arrangement had transformed into something more meaningful than logistics. The remaining weeks of the program passed with increasing momentum. Each update brought news of Shadow's improved physical condition and Robert's growing confidence in their reformed partnership. They learned modified commands that accommodated Shadow's limitations while preserving his dignity and purpose. Robert developed coping strategies for triggers that had previously spiraled into flashbacks. 2 weeks before program completion, Jessica received an unexpected call from Dr. Abernathy. "I wanted to discuss Shadow's ongoing care coordination," the psychiatrist began after pleasantries. "Robert mentioned you're providing transitional housing." "That's right," Jessica confirmed, "until they can find a suitable permanent arrangement. I've been impressed by the connection you've maintained throughout their treatment," Dr. Abernathy continued. "It's unusual to see such commitment from someone without prior relationship to either the veteran or the service animal." Jessica shifted uncomfortably, unsure how to explain her involvement. "It just happened. Shadow needed an advocate. And then you became part of their healing journey," Dr. Abernathy finished. "It's not uncommon in trauma recovery. Sometimes the most powerful healing connections form in the aftermath of crisis." The observation lingered with Jessica, prompting reflection on her own motivations. Had she recognized in Robert echoes of her father, another veteran whose PTSD had gone untreated until it fractured their family? Was Shadow a stand-in for the childhood pet her father had banished during a particularly difficult episode? Or was this simply who she was, someone who couldn't walk away once invested in another's well-being? Whatever the psychology behind her choices, the practical reality remained unchanged. In 10 days, Robert and Shadow would complete the program and move into her home. The guest room waited, freshly painted. The backyard featured new shade structures and a gentle ramp to the patio. The pantry contained both human and specialized canine provisions. Jessica had lived alone since college, guarding her independence as fiercely as her professional boundaries. Yet now she found herself preparing for cohabitation with a man she barely knew 3 months ago and his neurologically impaired German Shepherd. The situation defied rational explanation, yet felt inexplicably right. The homecoming day arrived with perfect early autumn weather. Jessica waited in the pickup area as Robert guided Shadow from the facility for the final time. Both walked with newfound confidence. Shadow's gait still uneven but purposeful, Robert's posture relaxed yet dignified. "The conquering heroes return," Jessica called as they approached, her attempt at lightness masking the unexpected emotion tightening her throat. Shadow reached her first, pressing against her legs in greeting. The physical affection, once cautious and halting, now flowed naturally. Robert followed, balancing their minimal luggage with practiced ease. "We've been looking forward to this," he said simply, the understated comment carrying the weight of genuine feeling. The drive home unfolded with comfortable conversation about immediate plans and practical arrangements. Shadow dozed in the back seat, occasionally rousing to gaze out the window or seek reassurance from Robert with a gentle paw. "Dr. Abernathy says he's exceeded all expectations," Robert shared. "Physically and behaviorally, they've documented his case for their research study on canine PTSD recovery." "He's a remarkable dog," Jessica agreed, glancing in the rearview mirror at their passenger. "Had a remarkable support team," Robert added quietly. "Still does." As they turned onto Jessica's street, she felt a momentary flutter of uncertainty. Would her modest home meet expectations? Would the reality of sharing space prove more challenging than anticipated? "Here we are," she announced, pulling into the driveway of the single-story Craftsman. "Nothing fancy, but it's solid. Good bones, as they say." Robert surveyed the property with appreciation. "It's perfect." Shadow will love the yard." The moment they opened the car doors, a complication materialized in the form of Mrs. Hernandez, Jessica's elderly neighbor, approaching with determined speed despite her cane. "Jessica, you didn't tell me your boyfriend was moving in," she called, her voice carrying across both yards. "And you got a dog. About time you had some company in that big house." Jessica felt heat rise to her face. "Mrs. Hernandez, this is Robert Hayes and his dog Shadow. They're staying with me temporarily while they transition from a rehabilitation program." The older woman gave Robert an appraising look, then bent slightly to address Shadow. "Handsome boys, both of you. Military, yes. My Eduardo was Army, 1968 to 1971. Robert straightened almost imperceptibly. "Yes, ma'am. Army. Shadow, too." This simple exchange, the recognition of service without demanding details, visibly relaxed Robert. Mrs. Hernandez chatted a few minutes longer, offering to share tomatoes from her garden before returning to her porch, seemingly satisfied with her reconnaissance. "Sorry about that," Jessica said as they unloaded the car. "She's sweet but nosy." "It's nice," Robert said unexpectedly. "Normal. Neighbors who care enough to notice comings and goings." The observation gave Jessica pause. How isolated had Robert been since returning from deployment? How many people had actually seen him beyond his status as a troubled veteran? Inside, Shadow conducted a careful inspection of his new environment, sniffing each room methodically before returning to Robert's side, apparently satisfied with the assessment. Robert followed Jessica's tour with genuine interest, complimenting her renovation work and asking thoughtful questions about the house's history. "I set up the guest room for you," Jessica explained, opening the door to reveal the freshly prepared space. "The study across the hall has a daybed if you prefer separate sleeping arrangements from Shadow, but the program recommended keeping him with you initially." "This is more than I expected," Robert said, setting down his duffel bag. "Thank you." "The backyard is fully fenced," Jessica continued, leading them through the kitchen to the back door. "I installed that ramp last week for Shadow, and there's a shaded area for hot days." Outside, Shadow surveyed his new territory with evident approval, carefully navigating the ramp before exploring the perimeter of the yard. Robert watched him with the mixture of pride and concern that had become his customary expression. "He looks happy," Jessica observed. "He is," Robert confirmed. "We both are. This is more than either of us deserved." "Deserving has nothing to do with it," Jessica replied firmly. "This is about moving forward." As evening approached, they settled into surprisingly comfortable domesticity. Robert insisted on cooking dinner, revealing unexpected culinary skills with Jessica's limited pantry offerings. Shadow positioned himself strategically between kitchen and living room, maintaining sight lines to both humans. The program emphasized establishing routine immediately, Robert explained as they cleaned up after the meal. Consistency helps Shadow feel secure in a new environment. Jessica nodded. "I've cleared my schedule tomorrow to help with the transition, but I'll need to be at the office Thursday and Friday." "We'll be fine," Robert assured her. "Shadow has his medication schedule, and I've got my VA appointment in the afternoon. Dr. Abernathy connected me with the local Veterans Center for continuing therapy." The practical conversation masked the underlying significance of the moment. Two relative strangers negotiating shared space, building trust through mundane details of daily life. Later, as Jessica prepared for bed, she paused outside the guest room door, hearing Robert's low voice speaking to Shadow. "We made it, buddy," he was saying softly. "Not where we thought we'd end up, but maybe somewhere better." Shadow's contented sigh was audible through the partially open door. Jessica moved away quietly, unwilling to intrude on their private moment of reflection. In her own room, she contemplated the strange journey that had led to this arrangement. 3 months ago, She'd been a dedicated but emotionally insulated professional, maintaining careful boundaries between work and personal life. Now her home contained a traumatized veteran and his equally traumatized service dog, and somehow this felt right, as if a piece had clicked into place that she hadn't realized was missing. The climax of their shared story had arrived not with dramatic confrontation, but with quiet homecoming. Shadow had survived against overwhelming odds. Robert had confronted his demons with growing courage, and Jessica had opened doors she'd kept firmly closed for years. What challenges awaited them remained uncertain. Shadow's health would require ongoing management. Robert's recovery would face real-world tests outside the structured environment of Warrior Bond, and Jessica's carefully constructed independence had transformed into interdependence, with all its attendant vulnerabilities. Yet in the soft sounds of man and dog settling into sleep down the hall, Jessica found unexpected peace. Sometimes healing happened in grand epiphanies and breakthrough moments, but more often it arrived in quiet acts of courage, opening a home, accepting help, beginning again with no guarantees except the commitment to try. Tomorrow would bring new adjustments, practical hurdles, and inevitable complications. But tonight, in the stillness of a house no longer empty, 3 broken paths had converged into something resembling hope. The autumn days settled into an unexpected rhythm as Shadow and Robert integrated into Jessica's home. Mornings began with Shadow's medication routine, followed by gentle exercises in the backyard to maintain his hard-won mobility gains. Robert prepared breakfast while Jessica organized for her workday, their movements around the kitchen developing an unspoken choreography that avoided collisions but allowed proximity. "You don't have to cook every morning," Jessica protested one Tuesday, 3 weeks into their cohabitation, as Robert placed perfectly scrambled eggs before her. "Small way to contribute," he replied with a shrug. "Besides, Shadow and I benefit from routine." Shadow, hearing his name, thumped his tail against the kitchen floor. The neurological tremors remained present but had diminished to occasional episodes, usually triggered by excitement or stress. His gait still favored his stronger side, but his overall condition had stabilized remarkably. "The cooking is appreciated," Jessica conceded, "but I feel like you're doing more than your share around here." It was true. Despite her initial concerns about hosting a recovering veteran, Robert had proven himself an ideal housemate. Beyond cooking, he'd taken on yard maintenance, repaired a leaking faucet, and even continued the living room renovation she'd abandoned months earlier. The guest bedroom and study had transformed from temporary shelter to personalized space, with military memorabilia carefully displayed alongside photographs from Warrior Bond. "It helps me," Robert admitted, refilling her coffee. "Having purpose, tasks to complete, tangible results." He glanced at Shadow, who had settled into his cushioned bed in the corner. The program emphasized productive engagement as part of recovery. Jessica understood this therapeutic aspect, but still felt the balance tilting. "Just don't feel obligated. This isn't rent payment through labor." Robert's expression tightened momentarily, a flash of the pride that remained beneath his gratitude. "I'm looking at apartments," he said after a pause. "Found a few ground-floor units that might work for Shadow's needs." The statement shouldn't have caused the sharp twinge Jessica felt. Their arrangement had always been described as temporary, transitional. Robert's independence was the goal, the successful outcome of his recovery journey. "That's great," she managed, gathering her work materials. "Let me know if you need references or anything." "Will do," Robert replied, his tone neutral as he cleared the breakfast dishes. At work, Jessica found herself distracted, her thoughts repeatedly drifting to the apartment conversation. Why had it unsettled her? She should be celebrating Robert's progress, his readiness to reclaim full independence. Instead, she felt a hollow apprehension at the prospect of her house returning to its previous silence. The answer came that evening as she arrived home to find Robert and Shadow in the backyard. Robert was seated on the patio, focused on replacing a broken slat in the fence. Shadow lay nearby, watchful but relaxed, occasionally bringing Robert a tool when commanded, a modified version of their military retrieval training adapted to Shadow's limitations. Jessica paused at the kitchen window, struck by the tableau. In the golden light of late afternoon, man and dog moved together with instinctive coordination, damaged but healing, their partnership transformed but intact. The scene radiated contentment, belonging. Her house had become a home. The realization hit with unexpected force. Before Shadow and Robert, the house had been her property, her project, her retreat, but not truly home in the deepest sense. The renovation tasks had been endless but ultimately hollow, improvements without purpose beyond resale value and aesthetic satisfaction. Now, watching Robert secure the final board, while Shadow supervised with dignified attention, Jessica confronted the truth she'd been avoiding. She didn't want them to leave. The admission felt dangerous, laden with complexity. She'd maintained careful professional boundaries throughout Shadow's treatment, positioned herself as advocate rather than friend. The temporary housing offer had been framed as practical assistance, an extension of her social worker role. Yet somewhere along the journey, these justifications had become pretense. The trio had formed something that defied professional categorization, not quite family in the traditional sense, but bound by shared purpose and mutual healing. "Perfect timing," Robert called, spotting her through the window. "I was just finishing up." Jessica composed herself and stepped outside. "Looks good. Was that the section Mrs. Hernandez's cat damaged?" "The very one," Robert confirmed, packing away tools. "Should hold up better now." Shadow greeted her with his customary lean against her legs, his version of a hug adapted to his balance limitations. Jessica knelt to ruffle his ears, finding comfort in the simple connection. "How was your day?" Robert asked, the routine question now familiar between them. "Challenging case," Jessica replied, grateful for the neutral topic. "Teenage brothers in foster care being separated because the older one aged out of the system." Robert nodded sympathetically. "System seems designed to break connections rather than preserve them." "Too often," Jessica agreed, following them inside as twilight descended. The evening unfolded with their established pattern: shared dinner preparation, Shadow's evening medication, a movie selected from Jessica's limited collection. The domesticity felt both comforting and precarious now that Jessica had acknowledged its impermanence. "About the apartments," Robert said during a quiet moment as the film credits rolled. "I've scheduled viewings this weekend if you're interested in coming along. Your perspective would be valuable, especially regarding Shadow's needs." Jessica hesitated, conflicted between self-preservation and honest engagement. "I'd be happy to," she finally said. "Saturday works better for me than Sunday." Robert seemed to study her expression, his perception honed by military training and trauma therapy alike. "Is everything okay? You seem distant tonight." The direct question deserved honesty, yet Jessica struggled to articulate feelings she barely understood herself. "Just processing some things," she replied. "Nothing urgent?" Shadow, sensing the subtle tension, rose from his bed and approached, placing his head on Jessica's knee in a gesture she'd come to recognize as his version of emotional support. The simple act of canine compassion threatened to unravel her careful composure. "I should get some sleep," she said, gently patting Shadow before standing. "Early meeting tomorrow." In her room, Jessica confronted the emotional tangle she'd been avoiding. Her attachment to Shadow had been immediate and uncomplicated, the instinctive connection between rescuer and rescued, but her feelings about Robert defied such simple classification. She respected his resilience, admired his commitment to Shadow, appreciated his contributions to their shared space. Beyond these rational assessments lurked something more complicated. a recognition of shared wounds, perhaps. Jessica's childhood in the shadow of her father's untreated PTSD had left its marks, different from combat trauma, but resonant nonetheless. Or perhaps it was simpler than that, the natural human yearning for connection, magnified by years of professional detachment and personal isolation. Whatever the psychological underpinnings, the practical reality remained unchanged. Robert was planning his departure, as had always been intended. Saturday arrived with perfect autumn clarity, the Texas heat finally yielding to more temperate weather. Jessica accompanied Robert and Shadow to view 3 potential apartments, each offering ground-floor access and small enclosed outdoor spaces. The first property, located near the VA Center, featured newly renovated units in a former motel. The manager, a veteran himself, welcomed Shadow without question, pointing out accessibility features and proximity to medical facilities. "What do you think?" Robert asked as they toured the modest one-bedroom. Jessica assessed with practiced objectivity, noting adequate space for Shadow's bed, convenient layout for medication preparation, secure patio area. "It has potential," she offered. "Good location for your appointments." The second property proved less promising, a converted warehouse with industrial aesthetic but poor sound insulation that could trigger Shadow's anxiety during storms or neighborhood noise. The third, however, offered unexpected charm, a small garden apartment behind a historic home with a private entrance and secluded yard surrounded by mature trees. "This one feels right," Robert said as they explored the space. Shadow seemed to agree, moving comfortably through the rooms with relaxed body language. "Peaceful, but not isolated." Jessica nodded, tamping down the inexplicable heaviness in her chest. "The yard is perfect for Shadow, and it's within your budget." The landlady, Mrs. Pemberton, a silver-haired widow whose son had served in Desert Storm, took an immediate liking to both Robert and Shadow. "Military folks understand respect for property," she declared. "And I've always believed in the healing power of animals." As they concluded the tour, Mrs. Pemberton pulled Jessica aside while Robert examined the kitchen fixtures. "He's a good man," the older woman observed. "Carrying heavy burdens, but good nonetheless. You're fortunate to have found each other." "Oh, we're not—" Jessica began automatically. Mrs. Pemberton waved away the clarification. "Whatever you are to each other, it's clearly beneficial. I've watched too many returning veterans struggle alone." Her gaze shifted to Shadow, who remained attentively at Robert's side. "The dog is special, too. Knows his purpose." The comment lingered as they drove home, Robert enthusiastic about the garden apartment, already planning furniture arrangements and schedule adjustments. Jessica contributed appropriately to the conversation while wrestling with the emotional undercurrent Mrs. Pemberton had identified. What were they to each other? Rescuer and rescued? Temporary housemates? Friends forged through crisis? The conventional labels seemed inadequate for the bond that had formed through Shadow's recovery journey. That evening, as Robert prepared dinner, Jessica's phone rang with a call from Warrior Bond. Dr. Abernathy's voice greeted her with characteristic directness. "I'm following up on Shadow's transition," she explained. "Robert's reports have been positive, but I wanted your perspective as well." "He's doing remarkably well," Jessica confirmed. "The medication protocol is managing his neurological symptoms, and his mobility continues to improve." "And Robert?" Dr. Abernathy prompted. Jessica glanced toward the kitchen, lowering her voice slightly. "Maintaining sobriety, attending VA appointments, engaging in the community. He's even looking at apartments today." A thoughtful pause followed. "That's significant progress," Dr. Abernathy acknowledged. "Though housing transitions can be particularly challenging for trauma survivors, the stability you've provided has been instrumental in their recovery." "It was always meant to be temporary," Jessica said, the words feeling hollow even as she spoke them. Of course, Dr. Abernathy replied. I should mention we're conducting follow-up research on our program participants. Would you be willing to complete some assessments about your observations of Shadow and Robert? Your unique perspective as both rescuer and housing provider would be valuable. Jessica agreed, and after the call ended, she found herself contemplating Dr. Abernathy's phraseology. Rescuer and housing provider. The clinical terminology stripped away the emotional complexity, reducing their connection to functional roles. Yet the reality had evolved far beyond these sterile classifications. Later that night, Jessica woke to the sound of movement in the hallway. Checking the time, 2:17 a.m., she listened more intently, recognizing the familiar pattern of Shadow's nails on the hardwood, accompanied by Robert's hushed voice. A nightmare, she guessed. Both Shadow and Robert still experienced them, though with decreasing frequency. Their usual routine involved quiet, walking through the house until the adrenaline subsided, followed by brief time in the backyard regardless of hour. Jessica debated whether to acknowledge their presence or allow them privacy in their coping ritual. The decision was made for her when Shadow paused outside her door, whining softly. "It's okay," she heard Robert whisper. "Let's not wake Jessica." But Shadow remained stationed at her door, his whine more insistent. Jessica rose, pulling on her robe before opening the door to find man and dog in the darkened hallway. "Sorry," Robert said immediately. "Bad dream. Shadow usually settles more quickly." In the dim light from the bathroom nightlight, Jessica could see the tension in his posture, the residual fear not yet fully processed. Shadow pressed against her legs, his body trembling slightly. Not from his neurological condition, but from emotional response to Robert's distress. "Come on," she said simply, leading them to the kitchen. "Let's have some tea." The midnight ritual emerged organically, Jessica brewing chamomile tea while Robert sat at the table, hands flat against the surface as if anchoring himself to the present. Shadow settled between them, maintaining physical contact with both humans. "Want to talk about it?" Jessica asked, setting mugs before them. Robert shook his head initially, then reconsidered. "Same one as always. Afghanistan? The explosion? Jake." He wrapped his hands around the warm mug. "But different this time." "You were there too." Jessica waited, offering silent space for elaboration if he chose. "You were trying to reach Shadow after the blast," Robert continued, voice rough with emotion. "But I couldn't warn you about the secondary devices. Couldn't move. Couldn't speak." The dream's symbolism seemed transparent. Fear of failing to protect someone else he cared about, anxiety about separation as his apartment search progressed. Jessica recognized the manifestation of attachment and loss that trauma survivors often experience during transitions. "Just a dream," she said gently. "We're all safe here." Robert nodded, his breathing steadier as the nightmare's grip loosened. "The apartment viewing today made it real. That we'll be leaving. Shadow feels it too." Jessica hesitated, professional training warring with personal truth. "You don't have to rush," she finally said. "The housing offer doesn't have an expiration date." "I can't impose indefinitely," Robert countered, pride evident beneath gratitude. "You've done more than enough already." Shadow shifted position, pressing his weight more firmly against Jessica's leg while maintaining contact with Robert, physically bridging the space between them, as he had emotionally since his rescue. "It's not imposition," Jessica said carefully. "The house feels more like home with you both here." The admission, though modest, represented significant vulnerability for someone who had maintained careful boundaries for so long. Robert studied her expression in the dim kitchen light, searching for politeness or obligation. Finding neither, he seemed momentarily at a loss for words. "I've been alone a long time," he finally said. By choice, after everything. Figured it was safer that way. His hand absently stroked Shadow's head. Then this one forced me to open up again. And now you. The conversation hovered at the threshold of deeper revelation, both participants acutely aware of the complex history that had brought them to this midnight moment. Shadow, oblivious to human hesitation, simply leaned his weight more heavily against Jessica's leg, his canine directness uncomplicated by doubt. "The garden apartment is perfect," Robert said after a long silence. "Everything we need. The landlady seems understanding about Shadow's condition. The location works for VA appointments." Jessica nodded, accepting what seemed to be his decision. "Mrs. Pemberton will be an excellent landlord." "But it's not home," Robert continued unexpectedly. "Not yet, anyway." The simple statement hung between them, laden with unspoken questions. "What if," Robert began, then paused to gather his thoughts. "What if we considered a different arrangement? Not temporary, emergency housing, but something more intentional." Jessica felt her pulse quicken. "What did you have in mind?" "I pay proper rent," Robert said, his military precision emerging in the structured proposal. "Take over the renovation projects officially, not just as contribution. Maintain clear boundaries about personal space. A real housemate arrangement, documented and legitimate." The suggestion held appeal, practical justification for what Jessica's heart had already decided. Yet something in his careful phrasing suggested he was offering the minimum acceptable proposal, testing boundaries before revealing fuller intentions. "And what does Shadow think of this plan?" Jessica asked, deliberately lightening the moment while buying time to process her response. As if understanding the question, Shadow shifted to press his body equally against both humans, head swiveling between them with clear preference for proximity over separation. "I think his vote is clear," Robert said, a rare smile softening his features. "But yours matters most. This is your home." "We're the interlopers." "Not interlopers," Jessica corrected gently. "Not for a while now." The admission hung between them, neither rushing to define its precise meaning. In the quiet kitchen, with Shadow connecting them physically and shared experience binding them emotionally, exact definitions seemed less important than acknowledged truth. They had become something to each other that defied simple categorization. "Let's try it," Jessica decided. "A formal rental agreement, clear expectations. See how it works beyond the crisis period." The relief in Robert's expression confirmed she'd made the right choice. Shadow, sensing the resolution, sighed contentedly and lowered his head to rest on his paws, mission apparently accomplished. As they returned to their respective rooms, the night's conversation marked a subtle but significant shift. What had begun as emergency intervention had evolved through crisis management to recovery support and now stood at the threshold of chosen connection. Complicated, uncertain, but authentic. The tragic circumstances of their meeting, Shadow's near death, Robert's rock bottom, Jessica's unexpected intervention, had transformed into something none could have anticipated. Not quite family in the traditional sense, but bound by choice rather than circumstance alone. Tomorrow would bring practical considerations, rental agreements, financial arrangements, longer-term planning for Shadow's medical needs. But tonight, in the quiet aftermath of nightmare and truth-telling, the path forward had clarified. Whatever label the world might apply to their unconventional household, they had found in each other something worth preserving. A sanctuary of mutual understanding where broken pieces fit together in unexpected wholeness. Winter descended on Texas with uncharacteristic force that year. The forecast warned of freezing temperatures and possible ice, sending Jessica and Robert into preparation mode, checking pipes, securing outdoor furniture, and stocking emergency supplies. Their coordination had become seamless in the 3 months since formalizing their living arrangement, each anticipating the other's movements with practiced familiarity. Shadow's arthritis will flare in this weather, Robert noted as he stored extra firewood on the covered porch. The cold amplifies his neurological symptoms. Jessica nodded, making a mental note to adjust the thermostat higher than her usual frugal setting. We should move his bed closer to the heating vent in the living room. They had learned to prioritize Shadow's needs without discussion, both recognizing that his well-being remained the foundation of their unusual household. The German Shepherd had become the bridge between them, the living embodiment of their shared purpose and unexpected connection. Dr. Reynolds had confirmed at Shadow's most recent checkup that the dog had exceeded all medical expectations. His recovery trajectory is remarkable, he'd told them during the follow-up visit. Neurological damage of this extent typically doesn't improve this significantly. He's determined, Robert had replied simply, his hand resting on Shadow's head. And well supported, Dr. Reynolds added, his meaningful glance encompassing both humans. Stability makes all the difference in recovery, canine or human. That stability had developed through deliberate effort and honest communication. The rental agreement Jessica had drawn up established clear parameters. Robert paid fair market rent, maintained the property, and continued Shadow's rehabilitation regimen. Jessica provided the space and participated in Shadow's care, but maintained her independence and professional boundaries. Yet despite these carefully constructed frameworks, something deeper had taken root. They had become, against all probability, a family of choice, bound not by blood or romantic entanglement, but by shared purpose and mutual respect. The forecast proved accurate. By evening, sleet tapped against the windows like impatient fingers, the temperature plummeting as darkness fell. Jessica built a fire in the rarely used fireplace while Robert prepared dinner. Shadow positioned strategically between kitchen and living room to maintain sight lines to both humans. "The VA center is closing tomorrow due to weather," Robert reported, checking his phone. "They're rescheduling all appointments." "My office, too," Jessica replied. "Emergency cases only." She hesitated, then added, "Might be nice, actually." "An unexpected day off." Robert nodded, a small smile softening his typically reserved expression. "Shadow will appreciate the company." As if recognizing his name, Shadow's tail thumped against the floor. His condition had stabilized into a new normal. Occasional tremors, especially when excited or stressed. Somewhat uneven gait, reduced stamina compared to his military working days. But his intelligence remained razor-sharp, his awareness of both humans' emotional states almost uncanny. After dinner, they settled into their evening routine, Robert reading military history from Jessica's grandfather's collection, Jessica catching up on case notes, Shadow dozing contentedly between them. The domesticity felt both ordinary and extraordinary, the product of 3 damaged beings finding unexpected harmony in their broken places. The ringing phone shattered this peaceful tableau. Jessica checked the caller ID, her office emergency line, rarely used outside working hours. "Jessica Whitman," she answered, immediately alert. "Jessica, it's Martin." Her supervisor's voice carried the strain of crisis management. "I need your help. We've got a situation with the Rivera brothers." Jessica's attention sharpened. The Rivera case had been her focus for months. 16-year-old Alex and his 18-year-old brother Miguel, orphaned 3 years earlier and separated when Miguel aged out of the foster system. Jessica had been fighting to maintain their connection despite bureaucratic obstacles. "What's happened?" she asked, already reaching for her notepad. Miguel called the hotline. Alex ran away from his foster placement during the dinner hour. With this weather, Martin's implication hung in the air. A runaway teen in freezing temperatures presented life-threatening danger. Where was he last seen? Jessica was already mentally calculating response options. That's why I'm calling you specifically. Miguel thinks Alex is trying to reach your side of town. Apparently you mentioned a park near your house where you sometimes walk your dog? Jessica's breath caught. She had, indeed, mentioned Oak Ridge Park during a session with Alex, describing Shadow as a way to build rapport with the animal-loving teen. Oak Ridge Park? It's about a mile from my house. Robert had straightened, instantly alert to the tension in her voice. Shadow, too, had raised his head, reading the shift in atmosphere. Police are already looking, but they're stretched thin with weather emergencies, Martin continued. Miguel is frantic. If Alex really is heading to your area, I'll find him, Jessica promised, already calculating the fastest route to search. Keep me updated if you hear anything. As she hung up, Robert was already retrieving her heavy coat from the hall closet. What's happening? Jessica explained rapidly while pulling on layers. One of her cases, a teenage boy missing in the freezing weather, possibly in their neighborhood. I need to search Oak Ridge Park. He might be trying to reach it based on something I told him. Not alone, Robert said firmly, reaching for his own coat. Not in these conditions. Jessica started to protest, then recognized the familiar determination in his expression, the same focus he displayed when Shadow needed protection. She nodded her acceptance. We'll cover more ground together. Shadow comes too, Robert added, retrieving the dog's service vest and specialized winter boots. His tracking abilities are still exceptional, especially if the boy has been to your office and might carry your scent. The suggestion made tactical sense. Despite his limitations, Shadow's military training remained intact, his nose as reliable as ever. Within minutes, they were in Jessica's SUV, heater blasting against the freezing air that had infiltrated the vehicle. Alex is 16, Hispanic, about 5'9", likely wearing a gray hoodie and jeans, Jessica briefed, as she drove carefully through the increasingly treacherous streets. He's been in foster care 3 years since his parents died, separated from his older brother when Miguel aged out of the system. Robert nodded, processing the information with military efficiency. Likely hypothermic already if he's been outside more than 30 minutes. Disoriented, possibly seeking shelter. He's smart but impulsive, Jessica added. This isn't his first runaway attempt, but it's the first in dangerous weather. Oak Ridge Park loomed dark and forbidding as they arrived, the normally welcoming green space transformed by ice and shadows. The police had already established a perimeter, their flashlight beams cutting through the darkness as officers called Alex's name. Jessica approached the officer in charge, quickly identifying herself and explaining their presence. This is Robert Hayes, my housemate. He's a combat veteran with search experience. And Shadow is a former military working dog with tracking abilities. The officer, looking exhausted and cold, assessed them quickly. We'll take any help available. Park's bigger than it looks. Lots of places a kid could hole up. We're focusing on the pavilions and restroom buildings first. We'll take the wooded area near the creek, Robert suggested, already surveying the terrain with practiced eyes. Shadow works better away from the commotion. They split from the main search party, Robert guiding Shadow while Jessica provided one of Alex's intake forms from her car, paperwork the teen had handled during a recent office visit. Shadow sniffed it thoroughly, his posture changing as he absorbed the scent. Track, Robert commanded, the familiar instruction triggering Shadow's training despite months of civilian life. The German Shepherd moved with purpose despite his uneven gait, nose working continuously as they navigated the icy paths. Jessica followed closely, calling Alex's name while scanning for any sign of the teenager. 20 minutes into their search, Shadow's behavior changed subtly, his pace quickening, ears forward with heightened interest. Robert recognized the signal immediately. He's on to something, he told Jessica, allowing Shadow more lead. Not definitive yet, but something's caught his attention. They followed Shadow toward the creek area, where a small wooden bridge spanned the usually gentle water, now partially frozen and treacherous. The dog paused at the bridge entrance, looking back at Robert with clear intent. "Under the bridge," Robert translated, already moving carefully down the slippery embankment. "Shadow thinks someone's down there." Jessica followed, heart pounding with hope and fear. "Alex? Alex, are you here? It's Jessica Whitman from Family Services." At first, only silence answered them. Then, barely audible over the wind, came a faint voice. "Ms. Whitman?" The relief hit Jessica like a physical force. "Alex, we're coming to you. Stay where you are." Under the bridge, sheltered somewhat from the direct assault of the elements, they found Alex huddled against the concrete support. The teenager was shivering violently, his lips tinged blue, fingers curled uselessly against the cold. "Sorry," he managed through chattering teeth. Didn't know where else to go." Robert was already removing his outer coat, wrapping it around the boy while conducting a rapid assessment. "Moderate hypothermia, no frostbite yet. We need to get him warm immediately." Shadow pressed against Alex's side, instinctively offering body heat. The teenager's rigid posture softened slightly at the dog's contact. "Is this Shadow?" he asked, recognition flickering through his exhaustion. "The dog you told me about." "Yes," Jessica confirmed, already calling the search coordinator to report their success. "He found you." The extraction proved challenging on the icy terrain, but Robert's military experience provided crucial guidance. With Shadow leading the way back to the established path, they carefully supported Alex between them, the teenager's coordination compromised by cold and exhaustion. At the park entrance, paramedics waited with thermal blankets and a heated ambulance. As they transferred Alex to professional care, the boy clutched Jessica's hand. "Don't tell Miguel," he pleaded, suddenly looking younger than his 16 years. "He'll blame himself." "He's worried sick about you," Jessica replied gently. "He's the one who called us." Alex's expression crumpled. "I just wanted to see him. My foster mom said the visitation was canceled because of some paperwork thing, and I couldn't wait another month. I thought maybe if I could get to your office." The desperation in his voice struck a chord with Jessica, the primal need for connection transcending rational decision-making. She squeezed his hand. "We'll figure it out, Alex. But you have to stop running. You could have died tonight." As the paramedics prepared to transport Alex to the hospital, Robert approached with Shadow. "He wants to say goodbye," Robert explained, indicating the German shepherd's focused attention on the teenager. Alex reached out a still trembling hand, and Shadow gently licked his fingers in response. The simple interaction brought the first genuine smile to the boy's face. "Cool dog," he murmured as the ambulance doors closed. In the aftermath, as they drove home through the freezing night, Jessica found herself processing the evening's events with new perspective. Shadow, dozing in the back seat after his successful mission, had demonstrated once again the healing power of purpose, his military training repurposed for civilian rescue. "He never forgets his training," Robert observed, seemingly following her thoughts. "Even with his limitations, his core remains unchanged." "Like his handler," Jessica replied softly. Robert glanced at her, surprise flickering across his features. "I'm not the soldier I was." "No," Jessica agreed. "You're something more complex now. But the core, the part that protects, that serves, that hasn't changed." The observation hung between them, weighted with deeper meaning than the simple words conveyed. In the months of their unconventional household, they had witnessed each other's evolution, Robert's gradual emergence from isolation, Jessica's cautious lowering of professional barriers, Shadow's adaptation to civilian purpose. At home, they moved through the motions of late-night return, warming the house, settling Shadow with medication for his weather-aggravated symptoms, changing out of ice-dampened clothes. The routine felt oddly ceremonial after the night's drama, a reaffirmation of the stability they had built together. "Alex reminds me of myself at that age," Robert said unexpectedly as they shared hot chocolate in the kitchen, Shadow dozing contentedly at their feet. "Desperate to hold on to the only family I had left. My father was dying of cancer when I enlisted. I went AWOL once, tried to get home when his condition worsened." Jessica listened, recognizing the rare gift of Robert's personal disclosure. He seldom spoke of his pre-military life, the focus of his sharing typically centered on his service experiences or Shadow's partnership. "What happened?" she prompted gently. "My commanding officer found me at the bus station," Robert continued, his gaze distant with memory. "Instead of the brig, he drove me home himself, stayed with me through my father's last night, said sometimes the right thing and the regulation thing aren't the same." The story revealed layers of Robert's character she was still discovering, the depth of his understanding about family bonds, the formative experiences that shaped his compassion beneath military discipline. "Alex and Miguel need that kind of understanding," Jessica mused. "The system separates them because of arbitrary age boundaries, ignoring that they're the only family each other has left." "What will happen to Alex now?" Robert asked. Jessica sighed, professional knowledge tempering optimism. "He'll face consequences for running away, possibly a more restrictive placement if his current foster home won't take him back, further separating him from his brother," Robert observed. Punishing desperation rather than addressing its cause. The critique hit close to Jessica's own frustrations with the system she served. "I've been trying to get Miguel approved as kinship placement, but his housing situation is unstable. One-bedroom apartment, irregular work hours, barely making ends meet himself." Robert was quiet for a long moment, thoughtfully stroking Shadow's ear as the dog dozed against his leg. "The garden apartment," he said finally. "The one we looked at. Mrs. Pemberton's place." Jessica looked up, confused by the apparent non sequitur. "What about it?" "It's still available. I saw the listing online yesterday." Robert's gaze was steady, intent. 2 bedrooms, ground floor, fenced yard, reasonable rent, and a landlady who understands military service and sacrifice. Understanding dawned gradually. "You think Miguel could qualify for it?" "With guarantors," Robert confirmed. "Mrs. Pemberton seemed flexible about rental history if the character references were strong, and if Miguel had stable employment. The VA center always needs administrative support," Jessica found herself saying, the possibilities unfolding rapidly. "Miguel has customer service experience from his retail job." The conversation accelerated, potential solutions emerging from their combined knowledge and resources. Robert's military connections could help Miguel secure more stable employment. Jessica's professional advocacy could potentially navigate the bureaucratic hurdles for kinship placement if Miguel had adequate housing. Mrs. Pemberton's empathy for service families might extend to orphaned brothers trying to remain together. "It's not simple," Jessica cautioned, professional realism tempering her growing excitement. "There are procedures, assessments, waiting periods." "Nothing worthwhile ever is," Robert replied, the simple philosophy reflecting his approach to Shadow's recovery, his own healing journey, and now, potentially, the Rivera brothers' reunification. As they finally retired for the night, exhausted but fulfilled by the evening's unexpected developments, Jessica reflected on the transformation their household had undergone. What began as emergency response to a dying dog had evolved into a sanctuary capable of extending its healing influence beyond its walls. Shadow's rescue had catalyzed connections none could have anticipated, between a traumatized veteran and a guarded social worker, between professional purpose and personal fulfillment, between past wounds and future possibilities. The German Shepherd's journey from military service through abandonment to renewed purpose paralleled each of their paths in different ways. The reversal was complete, though Jessica had only now recognized its full dimensions. Shadow, initially the recipient of their combined care, had become the catalyst for their own healing. The broken military dog had rebuilt them even as they rebuilt him. Tomorrow would bring practical challenges. Alex's hospital follow-up, Miguel's anxious questions, the system's institutional resistance to creative solutions. But tonight, in the quiet house warmed against winter's assault, Jessica allowed herself to acknowledge the truth that had been gradually emerging. They had rescued Shadow, certainly, but in equally meaningful ways, Shadow had rescued them all. Spring arrived in Texas with characteristic suddenness, bluebonnets carpeting highway medians overnight, trees exploding into green canopies, and temperatures rising with enthusiastic intensity. 6 months had passed since Shadow's desperate rescue beside that crumpled milk carton, a lifetime measured in small victories and fundamental transformation. In the backyard of Jessica's Craftsman home, now undeniably their shared home, a celebration was underway. Streamers decorated the patio, a homemade banner declaring Shadow's Gotcha Day hung between trees, and the aroma of grilled burgers mingled with the scent of new flowers. "Is this really necessary?" Robert asked, though his expression betrayed pleased embarrassment as he adjusted the special bandana around Shadow's neck, blue fabric emblazoned with "Hero" in bold letters. "Absolutely necessary," Jessica confirmed, arranging cupcakes on a tray. 6 months since we found him. Dr. Reynolds says it's practically a medical miracle. As if understanding he was the guest of honor, Shadow moved with dignified pride among the small gathering. His gait remained uneven, and occasional tremors still affected his hindquarters during excitement or stress, but his overall vitality had far exceeded every medical prediction. The German Shepherd navigated the yard with purpose, checking on each guest before returning to Robert's side, his self-appointed mission of protection never entirely abandoned. Dr. Reynolds himself stood chatting with Nurse Emily near the grill, both having accepted the invitation with enthusiasm. "I've been practicing 40 years, he was telling Mrs. Hernandez, the neighbor whose nosiness had evolved into genuine friendship. Never seen a recovery quite like Shadow's. Medicine explains part of it, but not all. Love explains the rest," Mrs. Hernandez declared with the confidence of her 83 years. That dog wasn't ready to leave his people. The gathering represented the unlikely community that had formed around Shadow's recovery. Dr. Reynolds and Nurse Emily from Heartland Animal Hospital, Mrs. Hernandez with her perpetual offerings of garden vegetables, 2 veterans from Robert's support group, Jessica's supervisor Martin, and most significantly, Miguel and Alex Rivera. The Rivera brothers stood somewhat apart from the others, still adjusting to their recent reunification. Miguel, now 19, maintained the hyper-vigilant posture of someone accustomed to protecting others, his gaze frequently checking his younger brother's location. Alex, having weathered his winter runaway adventure and subsequent placement changes, displayed the cautious optimism of someone afraid to fully trust good fortune. 3 weeks earlier, they had moved into Mrs. Pemberton's garden apartment, the very one Robert had once considered for himself and Shadow. The path to this outcome had been complicated, requiring Jessica's professional advocacy, Robert's networking through veteran channels to secure Miguel a position at the VA Center, and extensive documentation to satisfy the kinship placement requirements. "Still can't believe this worked out," Miguel said quietly as Jessica approached with lemonade. "Keep waiting for someone to say there was a mistake in the paperwork." Jessica smiled, understanding his protective skepticism. "No mistakes. You earned this by demonstrating exceptional commitment to Alex despite the obstacles placed in your way. Wouldn't have happened without you and Robert," Miguel acknowledged, watching his brother who had gravitated toward Shadow and was gently stroking the dog's head. And Shadow, I guess. Alex talks about that night under the bridge all the time. Says the dog saved his life. They saved each other, Jessica observed, noting the gentle care Alex took to avoid Shadow's sensitive areas, an empathy born from their shared experience of the rescue night. The celebration continued as afternoon mellowed toward evening. Robert, initially uncomfortable with social gatherings after years of isolation, had gradually relaxed into his role as co-host. Jessica watched him describing Shadow's training techniques to Martin, demonstrating modified commands that accommodated the dog's physical limitations while preserving his dignity and purpose. "You've built something remarkable here," Dr. Reynolds commented, joining Jessica at the patio table. "Not just Shadow's recovery, impressive as that is." Jessica followed his gaze across the gathering, Robert and Shadow at its center, the community that had formed around them, the Rivera brothers finding their place within it. "It wasn't planned," she admitted. "Any of it. The best things rarely are," Dr. Reynolds replied with the wisdom of his years. "Sometimes we're just fortunate enough to recognize them when they appear." As twilight approached, Robert called for attention. Somewhat self-conscious, but determined, Shadow sat at perfect attention beside him, sensing the importance of the moment. "I want to thank everyone for coming today," Robert began, military bearing evident in his posture despite the casual setting. "6 months ago, Shadow was dying alone on a street corner." His voice caught slightly. "I was dying too, in different ways." The gathering quieted, respecting the weight of his disclosure. "Jessica found him first," Robert continued, meeting her eyes across the yard. "Then found me, though she had every reason to walk away from both of us." Jessica felt unexpected emotion tightening her throat. They had never publicly acknowledged the complexity of their journey, the angry confrontation at the clinic, the gradual building of trust, the evolution from crisis intervention to chosen family. "Shadow taught us both something about second chances," Robert said, one hand resting on the German shepherd's head, "about finding new purpose when the old one is lost, about healing together instead of suffering alone." Shadow seemed to recognize his role in the moment, sitting straighter despite the tremor visible in his hind leg. The military bearing remained ingrained, dignified even in disability. "So, this celebration isn't just about Shadow's recovery," Robert concluded. "It's about all of us finding each other when we needed it most." The simple speech, delivered with unadorned honesty, captured the essence of their shared journey. As the gathering responded with quiet appreciation, Jessica found herself reflecting on the extraordinary chain of events that had led to this moment. If she hadn't taken that particular route home, if Shadow hadn't collapsed near that milk carton, if Robert hadn't appeared at the clinic when he did, any deviation might have led to entirely different outcomes. The fragility of their connection's origins made its current strength all the more precious. As evening deepened, guests gradually departed with warm farewells and promises to return. The Rivera brothers were the last to leave, Miguel expressing renewed gratitude while Alex knelt for a final moment with Shadow. "He really remembers me from that night," Alex marveled as the German shepherd leaned against him with gentle pressure. "It's like he knows we've both been through stuff." "He does know," Robert confirmed. "Military dogs develop special awareness of trauma. Shadow can sense when someone's hurting." The observation carried particular weight coming from Robert, whose own healing journey had been irrevocably intertwined with Shadow's. Jessica watched the teenager absorb this validation of his connection with the dog, recognizing how powerful it was for Alex to be seen and understood after years of bureaucratic processing in the foster system. "You can visit any time," Jessica reminded them as they prepared to leave. "Shadow enjoys the company, and Robert's offering to help with your college applications, Miguel." The brothers departed with the awkward gratitude of those unaccustomed to consistent support, still adjusting to the reality that their circumstances had genuinely improved. Jessica understood their caution. In her years of social work, she'd witnessed too many temporary improvements followed by crushing setbacks. "They'll be okay," Robert said, reading her thoughts as they cleared the yard together, Shadow supervising from his favorite observation point near the patio. "Miguel's already showing leadership potential at the VA center. And Alex's grades are improving now that he's not constantly worried about their separation." Jessica nodded, allowing herself cautious optimism. "It's a good foundation. Better than they've had in years." The Rivera brothers' situation had become personally significant to both of them, Robert recognizing in Miguel's protective dedication to his brother echoes of his own relationship with fallen comrade Jake. Jessica seeing in Alex's desperate attempts to maintain family connection reflections of cases she couldn't save. As they completed the cleanup, moving together with the synchronized efficiency of long-term housemates, Jessica found herself contemplating how thoroughly their lives had integrated. What had begun as emergency housing had evolved into genuine partnership, maintaining separate bedrooms and personal independence while sharing common purpose and mutual support. "Penny for your thoughts," Robert said as they settled on the patio for their customary evening debrief, Shadow curled contentedly between their chairs. Jessica smiled at the familiar phrase. "Just reflecting on how far we've come. 6 months ago, I never would have imagined hosting a gotcha day party in my backyard." "Our backyard," Robert corrected gently, the amendment significant in its quiet assurance. "According to the updated rental agreement, anyway." The referenced document, now in its 3rd revision, had evolved from temporary arrangement to long-term commitment. Robert had gradually assumed co-ownership of household responsibilities, financial contributions, and property maintenance. Shadow's care remained their shared mission, his medical needs and rehabilitation exercises integrated seamlessly into their daily routines. "Our backyard," Jessica acknowledged, the terminology still occasionally unfamiliar after years of fierce independence. "Our celebration. Our success story." Shadow, hearing the contentment in her voice, sighed heavily in apparent agreement. The dog had developed an uncanny sensitivity to emotional undercurrents between his humans, often positioning himself physically to bridge any distance between them. "I've been thinking about the future," Robert said after a comfortable silence. "Shadows, specifically." Jessica tensed slightly, conditioned by experience to anticipate complications. "His condition seems stable. Has Dr. Reynolds noticed something concerning?" "Just the opposite," Robert assured her. "His last evaluation showed continued improvement in neurological function, limited, but real." He leaned forward. Enthusiasm animated his typically reserved expression. "There's a program I've been researching. Therapy dog certification modified for dogs with disabilities." Jessica listened as Robert outlined the specialized training that would allow Shadow to serve as a therapy dog for trauma survivors, particularly veterans and children. The certification acknowledged his physical limitations while utilizing his exceptional emotional intelligence and military background. "He's happiest when working," Robert explained. "We both are. But his military skills need peacetime purpose." The parallels between handler and dog remained striking, both recovering from trauma, both seeking renewed meaning, both strongest when serving others. Jessica had witnessed their mutual rehabilitation, each drawing strength from the other's progress. "The VA Center has expressed interest," Robert continued. "Their mental health program director observed Shadow during my last group session. He accompanied me because of the thunderstorm triggering his anxiety." She noticed how he naturally gravitated toward the most distressed veteran, offering pressure therapy without training. "He's always had that gift," Jessica agreed, recalling Shadow's intuitive responses during his own recovery. how he'd press against Robert during flashbacks, or rest his head on Jessica's knee when she returned from difficult cases. The certification would make it official, Robert explained, allow him access to hospitals, treatment centers, even schools, limited sessions, of course, respecting his physical needs. The proposal represented another evolution in their journey, from saving Shadow's life to rehabilitating his body to now expanding his purpose. The progression felt natural, organic in its development from crisis to contribution. "I think it's perfect," Jessica said, reaching to stroke Shadow's ears. "For both of you." As darkness settled completely over the yard, they remained on the patio, reluctant to conclude the day that had commemorated their unlikely beginning. Shadow dozed between them, occasionally twitching in dreams that seemed peaceful rather than traumatic. "I received a letter today," Jessica said eventually, having debated whether to share the news on this already significant day. "From the Richardson Foundation. They've approved the grant proposal." Robert straightened, immediately grasping the importance. "The full amount?" Jessica nodded, still processing the news herself. "Full funding for the pilot program. Specialized placement for foster youth with trained support animals. Preference for siblings at risk of separation." The grant represented months of collaborative effort. Jessica's professional expertise combined with Robert's military connections and Shadow's living example of healing partnership. The proposed program would create therapeutic living arrangements for foster youth like the Rivera brothers, pairing them with specially trained support animals and qualified mentors. "You did it," Robert said, pride evident in his voice. "We did it," Jessica corrected, echoing his earlier amendment. The Foundation was particularly impressed by the documentation of Shadow's impact on Alex during and after the rescue. "And your contribution about military working dogs transitioning to civilian service gave the proposal unique credibility." The Richardson grant would allow Jessica to implement concepts that had evolved directly from their experience with Shadow: the healing potential of human-animal bonds, the importance of maintaining family connections during trauma recovery, the value of repurposed skills, and renewed purpose. "It starts small," Jessica continued, energy building as she outlined the program parameters. 5 youth placements initially, with trained support dogs from rescue organizations, comprehensive wraparound services for both the animals and the youth. She paused, meeting Robert's gaze directly. "They want Shadow as the program ambassador, and you as consultant for the animal training component." The proposition represented perfect symmetry. Shadow's journey from abandoned military dog to healing catalyst now extending to formalized program, Robert's transition from isolated veteran to mentor and trainer, Jessica's evolution from conventional social worker to innovative program developer. From one dog by a milk carton, Robert marveled quietly, to potentially dozens of animals and youth supporting each other's recovery. The observation captured the extraordinary expansion of impact from that initial rescue moment. What had begun as one social worker stopping for one abandoned dog had catalyzed ripples of healing that continued to extend outward, to Robert, to the Rivera brothers, to the veterans in Robert's support group, and now potentially to countless foster youth and rescue animals. As the night deepened around them, stars emerging in the clear Texas sky, Jessica felt the weight of the journey they had traversed together. 6 months earlier, she had been a dedicated but emotionally isolated professional, maintaining careful boundaries between work and personal life. Robert had been a traumatized veteran drowning in guilt and alcohol. Shadow had been a dying dog, abandoned and suffering. Now they sat together in shared space that had become genuine home, celebrating survival that had transformed into purpose, planning future contributions born from past suffering. The path had not been linear or simple. Shadow still experienced seizures during thunderstorms. Robert occasionally woke from nightmares of Afghanistan, Jessica sometimes struggled with the vulnerability of interdependence after years of self-reliance. Yet these ongoing challenges no longer define them. Like Shadow's uneven gait, present but accommodated, acknowledged but not limiting, their individual wounds had become integrated aspects of strengthened identity rather than devastating deficits. "We should head in," Robert eventually suggested as the night air cooled. "Shadow's medication is due, and we both have early starts tomorrow." The mundane observation, practical, domestic, ordinary, struck Jessica with its profound significance. This was healing at its most fundamental level, not the dramatic absence of all symptoms, but the quiet incorporation of care into daily rhythm. Medication schedules and early meetings existing alongside celebration and ambition, the ordinary and extraordinary interwoven into sustainable life. As they moved inside together, Shadow rising with dignified determination to follow his humans, Jessica reflected on the milk carton that had started everything, the humble object that had become symbolic in their shared narrative. Dr. Reynolds had preserved it, cleaned and sealed in a shadow box that now hung in the Heartland Animal Hospital lobby alongside Shadow's photograph and story. From desperate survival to purposeful living, the small plaque beneath it read, "Shadow's journey reminds us that healing happens in community and that purpose can be found even after profound loss." The simple tribute captured the essence of their collective transformation. The stray dog, who had lain dying beside a milk carton, dreaming of food, had found not just sustenance, but connection. And in that connection they had all discovered the most essential nourishment, the knowledge that broken pieces could form new wholeness, that trauma could transform to wisdom, and that family could be created through choice as powerfully as through birth. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: Shadow's therapy dog training, the Richardson program development, the ongoing support of the Rivera brothers. But tonight, in the quiet home they had built together, Jessica allowed herself to fully acknowledge the journey's meaning. Sometimes the most profound healing begins with the simplest act of stopping to help a suffering creature. And sometimes, in saving another, we save ourselves in ways we never imagined possible. Dear friends, remember when a simple act of kindness could change everything? Shadow's journey from a dying German Shepherd to a beacon of hope reminds us it's never too late for new beginnings. Like many of us navigating our golden years, Shadow faced unexpected challenges. His body betrayed him, his purpose seemed lost, his future uncertain. Yet through Jessica and Robert's care, he found not just healing but a new mission, bringing together broken souls who needed each other. Isn't that what we all seek? As we enter this chapter of life, wondering if our best contributions are behind us, Shadow's story whispers, your greatest impact may still lie ahead. Your wisdom, earned through struggle, is precisely what someone else needs. The milk carton that could have marked Shadow's end instead became the starting point of his most meaningful chapter. What milk carton moments await in your life? What souls might need exactly what you have to offer? I'd love to hear about a time when someone's unexpected kindness changed your path, or how you found new purpose in this stage of life. Remember, the most beautiful stories often begin when we pause to help another soul in need. Please share your thoughts below.